Hi everyone, my name is Alisa and I'm an automation engineer in Bots and People, and I want to welcome you to our tool comparison series. In this series, we will explore 3 different RPA tools: Power Automate Desktop, Robocorp, and UiPath. And we will automate the exact same process with those softwares. So the process we are going to automate consists of the following parts. Via API, we receive overall data about a purchase order that was created. We need to correspond it to the existing Excel file, which stores separate line items that belong to each of the orders. Once we match them, we can enter data into Invoice Generator website and download it as a PDF file. Once all invoices are downloaded, we need to merge them together into one PDF file. This process includes different typical elements like website automation, PDF, Excel files, and also API connection that can be met in many different processes. So let's start with our first automation in Power Automate Desktop. So let's start creating our automation by first creating a new flow in Power Automate Desktop. Let's call it Tool Comparison and click Create. So in this automation, we are not going to focus on error handling or log messages. We will just try to create this automation as quickly as it's possible. And as a first step, we are going to get our data from the Mocker website. So this is actually a very useful website for testing and development purposes. And what you can do is create a schema, so a created schema called Invoice, and define some fields like invoice number, PO number, date, and bill to. And then using API, you can actually get this data and generate some random rows. So in this case, we are generating 10 random rows, and using this link, you can see the JSON data. So in here, we have PO number from 1001 to 1010, and that's the data that we are going to use in our automation. So in Power Automate Desktop, let's first create a new subflow, and let's call it Get Data. And click Save. So as our first step, we are going to use action invoke web service to connect to our API. And the only thing that we need is the URL from Mocker. Let's copy it and paste it as a parameter. The method is get, everything else is correct, so let's click Save. And now we want to run our flow, but first we need to invoke and run our subflow from the main flow. So let's type run. Select Run Subflow and select our subflow Get Data, click Save, and now we can run. So on the right in Flow Variables in Web Service Response variable, we can see the results of our API request, but it's not very readable for us, so let's use another action. Just type JSON and select Convert JSON to Custom Object. And here we're going to select our Web Service Response, and let's rename our variable and call it JSON sales data and click Save. Okay, so let's run our flow once again. And on the right in JSON sales data variable, we can see a structured data, and that's basically the variables that we are going to use in our flow. So as the next step, we're going to read data from our Excel file. So when we are processing purchase order 1004, we want to get only those 2 rows, and for 1008, only those 4 rows. And for example, in UiPath, what we would do is read the whole worksheet and then do the filtering using action filter data table. However, in Power Automate Desktop, there is no such action. You cannot filter the data table. However, what you can do is connect to your Excel file and treat it like an SQL database and use SQL queries to retrieve data. So that's exactly what we are going to do. In Microsoft documentation, we can actually find the exact steps that we need to perform for it. So first of all, let's create a new subflow and call it Open SQL Connection. And click Save. So then let's set a variable that will store file path to our Excel file. Let's call it Excel file path. And copy it from our folder. The only thing that we need to do is to delete the double quotes. So the next step is going to be opening SQL connection. So let's type it in here. And let's copy the connection string from the Microsoft website and simply replace this variable with our variable. Okay, it's going to be stored in SQL connection, so let's click Save. And next, what we are going to do is execute an SQL statement. So let's scroll down in here. There's the exact statement that we need to use for filtering. Okay, let's type SQL and place our query. So now let's replace the values with the real values that we have. So our worksheet is sales data. Remember to keep the $sign. Our column name is purchase order. And let's replace value with 1004 for now. And click Save. What we also need to do is to close our Excel file. And in the main, let's for now disable the first subflow and run another one. Okay, let's select it from the drop-down, click Save, and run our flow. Okay, so on the right, in our query result, we can see 2 rows for purchase order 1004, so everything is correct, and we can now filter our data. So we do not want always to filter our data by purchase order 1004. Actually, what we want to do is iterate through all purchase orders that we receive from our API, and we want to filter our data based on the purchase orders that we process currently. So for that purpose, we are going to create a loop using our for each action. And what we're going to iterate through is actually our JSON sales data, because that's the data that we receive from our API. And let's store it in current purchase order. Inside our loop, we want to execute our query to get the data based on current purchase order. So let's cut it and place it inside our loop. And instead of 1004, let's write current purchase order. So let's select it from our list of variables. However, we also need to indicate the exact column. So our column is called PO number. Okay, click Save. And now we can enable the first step. And also to see what results we get, let's use display message. Place it also in the loop. And in message to display, we will select basically our query result and click Save. Okay, so now we can run our flow once again. Okay, and we can see our purchase order 1001 and all the data for it from the Excel file. Let's click through all of them. Okay, everything looks correct. And now we have all of our 10 purchase order processed and data from Excel filtered. So once we have all our data in place, we can start entering it in our invoice generator. So as a first step, we are going to enter the header. So basically invoice number, date, PO number, also bill to, and also from whom this invoice was issued. All this data is stored in our API, so basically in our current purchase order. So first of all, we need to actually launch our website. So for that, let's type launch and select launch new Chrome. We're going to do it before we do the loop. So our launch mode is new instance, and let's place there our URL as well. And Windows state, let's call it maximized. And here let's just delete this index and click Save. So once our website is open, for each purchase order, we're going to input some data. So let's create a new subflow and let's call it enter sales data and click Save. So our subflow we're going to run from our loop. So let's place it in here and select enter sales data and also delete this display message. We do not need it anymore. So in our enter sales data, let's start the recorder and input data on our website. So let's click record. And now we'll be indicating the fields that we need. So from whom, we are just going to type company XYZ. Bill to, I will just type Alisa for now. Remove that one. Invoice number, also some random number. PO number, let's type 1001. And due date, let's type today's date, so 9th of March. And we now have everything, and we can click Finish. So now we can see all the auto-generated steps, and let's delete some of them that we do not need. So the first one and the last one. Okay, and everything else seems correct except for launch new Chrome. We already did it before the loop. So in our UI elements, let's also rename them so that we would know which one is what. So this one was from. Okay, the next one, bill to. The next that we have is our invoice number. Then we have our purchase order number. And the last one is date. As we are running our flow from the loop, we are going to use our current purchase order to enter our real data. So company XYZ is actually going to be hard-coded. It's some random name of the company. But instead of Alisa, we are going to have our current purchase order. So let's select it in here. And the column bill to. So the column names come from our API. So the way we define our fields, their names are going to be our column names. So let's click Save. For the next one, we're going to use invoice number column. So select current purchase order once again, and in square brackets, write PO number. So let me copy that one. Okay, in here we actually have our invoice number, not PO number. Okay. In here is going to be PO number, and the next one is date. And click Save. Okay, so now as we have everything in place, we can run our flow, but let's first close Chrome. Okay, and click Run. Okay, so the website is launched. And we can see bot populating all the data that we indicated. So it's going to populate 10 different purchase orders. We cannot see PO number very well because date is covering it, but we can see that it's also changing. So let's wait until everything is done to make sure that all 10 purchase orders are populated. Okay, so we're number 5. What I really like about Power Automate Desktop is those yellow highlights. I think they're very helpful. And you can right away see where data is being populated. Okay, 2 more to go. Okay, and the last one. So the header we can input, and now we would need to input different line items for each purchase order. So after entering our header information, we also need to enter information about each separate line item. So to one purchase order can belong several line items, so we need to iterate through all of them, meaning that we need to place another for each loop into our existing one, and we're going to do it in here. So what we're iterating through is actually query result, because it stores all the line items for current purchase order. So let's select it in here and store into current line item and click Save. Let's use another subflow for entering our invoice data. And we will place it as a first step in our for each loop. Using run subflow, we here select enter invoice data and click Save. So let's use the recorder one more time, and we are going to record all the steps that we perform on our website. So this time we're entering some random line item, some quantity, and some rate. What we also need to record is clicking this Add Line Item button. So when we have more than one line item, we are going to enter as many of them as we have. But it would make no sense to record selector for each of them, like for the second, third, and fourth one. What we are going to use is the first selector, and we will try to modify it somehow to match also for the second, third, and fourth line, and so on. To find the difference between them, let's first also record the second line. So I will write test, some quantity, and also some rate, and click finish. So now we have all our actions generated, and let's delete the ones that we do not actually need. So launching new Chrome, waiting for 2 seconds. Okay, here send keys as well. And the last one, everything else we need. In our UI elements, let's also rename our selectors. Okay, so this one is going to be item. The next that we have is our quantity. And then we have rate. And our button Add Line Item. So let's now find the difference between our first row and second row. So for that, let's go to Edit, Edit, copy our selector and paste it into a notepad. And let's do the same for the second line. Okay, we're pasting it below. And let's now find the difference between them. So at the beginning, everything is the same. The only difference that we can see is actually this index. So if for the second line we have index 1, meaning for the first one we will have index 0, for the third one index 2, and so on. So basically we could use it like this. Also indexing here, but index 0. If you have some index, it's very useful to use iterator to iterate through rows. So that's the approach that we're going to use. So let's get back to our flow. Going to the main one, and let's create an iterator. So we're using set variable and place it before we iterate through our line items. So the first value of iterator is going to be 0 because the web page is 0 based, so 0 iterator will find us the first line item row, and click save. After each iteration of our current line item, we are going to increase this variable. So that's the action that we are going to use, increase variable. Our variable is called iterator, and we are going to increase it by 1, and click save. So now we can actually use the index in our selector. So let's go back here. Okay, so I will copy this equal, place in here, but instead of 1, it's going to be our iterator. So for the first line, it's going to be 0. So I will copy it and paste for other selectors as well. So also for quantity. And for our rate. For add line item, we're not going to use it because add line item is always only one button and it's not changing its selector. So what we can do now is actually delete those steps and also delete the elements that we do not need anymore. Okay. So now we can reuse our steps to enter line items for the first, second, third, and so on rows. So we also need to consider when do we press our add line item button. So we only press it before we enter the second, third, and fourth line item. So if our iterator is equal to 0, we do not need to press it yet. So let's use a condition if and place it before we enter data. So if our iterator is actually greater than 0, that's when we're going to press the button. So in this way, we do not press it before we enter the first one. We also do not want to enter this random data. We actually want to take data from our Excel file. So let's go back to our main and see where our data is stored. So it is stored in current line item. So let's go back to enter invoice data, and instead of pencil, select our current line item, but we also need to point out the column. So in our Excel file, this column is called item. So let's put square brackets and type item. And let's copy it and click save. So for the next one, it's not 1, 1, 2, 3, but our units. Okay. And for the last one, the column is called unit cost. And let's click save. So now we can test our flow. Let's go back to main and click run. So the first step is taking data via API, then launching Chrome. Okay. And we can now see our bot entering header for us. Okay. View number, due date. And now entering line items, clicking line item button and entering the second line. So actually now we need to download our invoice before we enter data for the next one. So I will just close Chrome and stop our bot. So let us create a new subflow. I'll close the error, create new subflow and name it download invoice. Click save. So when do we run it? We actually run it after we entered all line items, so after our second loop. So let's select run subflow and place it in here. Our subflow is download invoice. So let's go to our download invoice and use recorder once again. Okay, and enter the required data only so that we had our button enabled. So let's click record. And the first step is our download invoice button. Okay, and next is our PDF recommended. So now we need to enter the file path. So let's click on this window so it would get in focus. Okay, okay, now it sees it. And I will just type anything and click the save button. Okay, now we can finish. As always, let's delete the actions that we do not need. Okay. We do not need that one. And also go into web page. Okay, and let's rename our UI elements. So that is going to be download invoice. Then we have our PDF recommended. I'm just going to name it like that. Okay, this one we do not need. Now we have our file path. And our button save. So let's copy the path to our folder where we're going to store our invoices. And let's input it in here. Plus, what we are going to input right now is also the name of the file that we are going to use. So I will just write first invoice and then let it be our invoice number. So we can actually go back to our enter sales data. So our invoice number was current purchase order plus invoice number. Okay. And what we also need to do is type .pdf. So let's go back to our invoice generator, and from this page we actually need to return to our main page. But what we actually can do is we could simply go back to our website using its link. So let's type go to web page, and in here our URL. Click save. And now we can test our flow. Let me first close our invoice generator. Go back to main. And now we can do the run. So 2 more steps we need to consider before our run. So first of all, we're going to create a new subflow to merge our PDF files. So let's go to Merge Invoices, click Save. And as a first step, we need to get all files from our folder that stores the newly downloaded files. So I'm going to place its pause. We do not need to change anything. I'll just click Save. And the next one is Merge PDF files. So the PDF files are now stored in our files variable. And in here, I'll just place the pause and type merged invoices.pdf and click Save. The next step that we are going to do is close our SQL connection before we stop our process. So let's place it at the very end. And it's automatically selected. We can click Save. And now we will run our flow to see if it works correctly. So let's take a look at the files that were downloaded by our flow. So let's take some random file. Okay, so we have here our bill to, due date, PO number, and invoice number, company XYZ, and also some line items. So now let's check our merged invoices file. So in here we have 10 different pages, so it means 10 different files were merged, meaning that our flow worked correctly, and now we will do the same process also in 2 other RPA softwares.